There were 4 waiting when I started. Hold on. Okay, you are live.
Thank you. Good evening. If you see a tail in my pictures, because I'm doing this meetup from home and my cat has decided to join, although he's a little bashful and maybe won't show his face. Thank you all for being here. I do this once a month. We are alternating in person 1 month, virtual the next month. I received some questions ahead of time, and I'm going to go through those questions. Um, if anyone wants to submit questions, Lindsay, tell them how, please.
You can email chairmancs@dccouncil.gov. You can contact us via social media. That's on Instagram, Blue Sky, X. And the quickest way is to write your questions in the chat on Facebook and YouTube.
Facebook or YouTube. And again, the email was what? Chairman CS?
chairmancs@dccouncil.gov.
I was speaking when you said that. Say it again.
Chairman CS, as in constituent services, @dccouncil.gov.
Great. All right, so I'm just going to go through these questions that were submitted in advance, and I actually haven't read them, so this will be news to me. Given the council has seen DC's homelessness rates grow on its watch, do you plan to push for dramatically bolder measures, or should we expect more of the status quo? Well, my answer would be this. I don't want to see more of the status quo. With the current council period, which began January 2nd, I separated the oversight of the Department of Human Services from the Housing Committee, and it is not the only agency, but pretty much a standalone in the Committee on Human Services chaired by Councilmember Matt Fruman. So I'm hopeful that Councilmember Fruman, because he doesn't have other large major agencies in the committee, will be able to really press THS to do better. Homelessness is a national problem, and it stems in large part from the disinvestment over the decades by the federal government in housing and affordable housing. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing more. And so I am hopeful that we will get better at this. I do want to note we're going to get the budget from the mayor on April 2nd, I believe. And I'm expecting that it will not have bolder measures in the budget dealing with the homelessness, but I think that's also because I'm expecting that the budget's going to be tight. Next question, please explain what the council and the mayor's office are doing to protect DC residents, businesses, and nonprofits from the illegal actions being taken by the federal government. Well, it's kind of hard to proactively prevent illegal actions if the federal government wants to act illegally. And what we are seeing is that it's being taken to court and that the courts are stepping in. I totally get it that a lot of folks are nervous that the courts, which have seen changes more and be more conservative since the last Trump administration, that folks are nervous that the courts will actually protect us. But really, the only way to exercise a check on illegal actions by the executive is through either the legislature, which is Congress, or the courts. Now, having said all that, I had a conversation as recently as yesterday with our Attorney General, who's working with states' attorneys general from other states, and very active in seeing what's going on with litigation and whether there's litigation that the district should be joining in. So, for example, the district was a co-plaintiff in the legal challenges to the president's birthright executive order. And I believe the district has also been a party in some of the litigation over pausing, a nice diplomatic word, pausing um, federal payments, federal funding of, so for instance, Medicaid. Next question. I urge you to advocate for stronger legal protections and enforcement mechanisms to safeguard the mental wellness, dignity, and general protection of the careers of federal employees. I, along with so many folks, walked away from a career in private industry to dedicate myself to serving the public. My local leaders must ensure that we can do so without fear. Well, I completely agree with the sentiment, but as a local government, we don't have a lot of leverage or standing to um, participate in actions involving the federal workforce. That doesn't mean that there aren't discussions about what we can do and how we can be helpful. I believe that some of the litigation is being led by the state of Maryland. I don't think Virginia's involved. And as I said on the last question, our Attorney General is working with other states' attorneys general. Related to this is there's been concerns about unemployment insurance. And at a public hearing last week, I asked specifically if there's enough money in the unemployment insurance trust fund. And there is, not that that's the way we want to see federal workers go. I want to see federal workers protected by civil service, and am very sympathetic to litigation that pushes back against illegal actions. But it's difficult for the District of Columbia to assert itself in federal actions. Can you speak broadly about what presidential interference in DC governance, specifically criminal justice, would mean for the district? Can I speak broadly about it? Well, it depends on what the presidential interference would be. Taking over a police department, which my recollection he could do if there's an emergency, but only for a short period of time, and then would require congressional approval. I don't see that happening in the short term. Presidential interference, for example, pressing the United States attorney who prosecutes all of our felony cases to be more, not rigorous, I don't want to say that, strict. Well, I actually think that could be counterproductive. I think it would be counterproductive in that, for one thing, both the president and the Senate have done a poor job of confirming our judges, so our criminal courts are backed up. And we know just from research that the toughest sentences don't actually have a deterrent effect. In any event, we just have to see what that interference will be. I can tell you that here again, our Attorney General has been working out scenarios, what possible things the federal government could do, and what our response could be. If it interferes with home rule, then I can assure you we will push back. At least I will, but I think that the Attorney General and the mayor will as well. So we have to see. And I'm happy to answer follow-up questions on that. What do you think these recent attacks on DEI will mean for the study of Black history? Well, I am aware that the president, through agencies such as the National Endowment for the Arts, is trying to condition any federal grants on eliminating DEI. I think it's horrible. It's pretending that somehow race neutral is actually race neutral because it isn't. But I think that as a community, and I say that broadly, meaning all of us in Washington, D.C., that we care about DEI and that we also care about Black history. And, you can pretend to rewrite history or Black history, but actually you can't. Next question, Mr. Chairman, please tell me that you will sponsor and/or support council legislation to disallow council members who have been expelled from the council from running for office in Washington, D.C. again. This glaring loophole is one more reason why home rule is under assault. Well, the Home Rule Act written by Congress speaks to our ability to expel, and the language prohibiting someone who's been expelled from running for office is actually is written differently. It says that only if a member has been convicted while in office, convicted of a crime while in office, are they prohibited from running for office. So, it wouldn't be the first time that Congress or members of Congress are hypocritical, but if they don't like that somebody could run for election when they've been expelled, that's Congress's own legislative draftsmanship. And that's the Home Rule Act, which we cannot just amend on our own. Now, the next couple of questions deal with RFK. What do you think the impact would be on local neighborhoods in the scenario the Washington Commanders were to choose to develop at the RFK site? Would it benefit residents in terms of economic growth, job creation, and or neighborhood revitalization? Okay. If a stadium is built at the RFK site, it would have an impact on the residential neighborhoods of Kingman Park and Rosedale. The impact, I think, would be primarily on game days, which is like 9 days a year, maybe a couple of concerts thrown in. And that's not to minimize the impact. In terms of job creation, economic growth, well, the talk is that there would be, whether the stadium or not, and I'm pretty sure the mayor is going to push for a stadium, that there would be a development around the stadium, and that would be offices, residential, retail. So we would see some economic growth there. Job creation, there would be jobs created. However, would they be local residents? Well, probably we would have some requirement for what do we call first source for hiring local residents for jobs. I'm sure there would be commitments if there are any DC dollars involved. We would require commitments for local jobs. Would that be satisfying to everybody? No. Neighborhood revitalization, let's just be honest. Neighborhood revitalization sounds great, but it also means displacement. Next question. I want to express my concerns regarding the development of the RFK site, particularly its significance for Ward 7, which has faced longstanding neglect in terms of investment and development. Can you provide an update on the current plans for the RFK site and how they will specifically address the needs of our ward? If securing a stadium deal does not materialize, what alternative anchor deals are being considered to ensure that Ward 7 can still benefit from the economic opportunities and enhanced amenities that this development has the potential to provide? Well, let me start by answering. It is way too early to give any kind of a meaningful answer to that. If securing a stadium deal does not materialize, what alternative anchor deals are being considered? It's too early. For one thing, the mayor has not shared what her thinking is. For another, I would bet a large sum of money that the mayor is talking with the commanders about negotiating a stadium, but there's no deal yet, so we don't even know what that would look like. And as I said, the talk so far has been about a development that would be more than just a stadium, retail office, and residential. Affordable housing, how much affordable housing, don't know. If we subsidize the stadium, and I have said my position is that we should not put public dollars into a football stadium. If we subsidize it, then we could demand more affordable housing. If we don't subsidize it, then I think we would have to allow for that development to help pay for construction of a stadium, and therefore there would probably be less affordable housing. But then again, we wouldn't be putting hundreds of millions of public dollars into a stadium. So it's just too early to say what the plans are or what the plans could be, other than what I just said. I would add as well, the question comes from the perspective of helping Ward 7. Most of Ward 7 is east of the river. I don't see that Ward 7 east of the river is going to benefit from development west of the river, even if it is in the same ward. It would have more of an effect, to the extent it has an effect, on the neighborhoods of Kingman Park, Rosedale. The next several questions deal with schools. How is the council holding DCPS and DGS responsible for the lack of building safety and restoration? Not quite sure what that means. We have a hearing tomorrow on the failure of these DGS to ensure that there is heat in all of our public schools. Building safety, I'm just not sure what that means. And restoration, is that modernization? Well, part of what we're going to discuss tomorrow, that I'm going to discuss tomorrow, is the fact that the heat has failed even in some of the recently modernized schools. And I want to know what DGS is doing about that. Next question. I sometimes wonder if the district is providing the necessary oversight to ensure that schools like McKinley Tech are providing overall academic excellence and technological education. How is the council conducting oversight to ensure school staff are implementing the proper academia related to their respective programs? Well, let's see. Education comes under the committee of the whole, which I chair. And we don't get into the detail of individual schools like McKinley Tech and whether McKinley Tech is providing overall academic excellence and technological education. We approach this more broadly. What are the different LEAs? That's the local education agencies. DCPS is one. The charters have, I think there are over 60 charter LEAs. We look at this more broadly. What are the LEAs doing to ensure improvement in the annual assessments? It used to be called PARC, it's now called CAPE. Looking more broadly at what are the LEAs doing to increase the rates of literacy and math proficiency. So we're doing it more broadly, and in that way, catching the individual schools, but not focusing specifically on the individual schools or specifically on their programs. Next question. My son has to take the metro to and from school daily. Why has the district not yet created another school just like McKinley, or a second campus east of the river that would be more convenient? Or would the council consider the expansion of specialized DCPS campuses across the city? Let me begin by saying there are thousands of empty seats in DCPS schools. There are thousands of empty seats in charter schools. We do not need to be opening more schools. What I have been pressing for is a greater variety of offerings in our high schools, such as experiential learning, after-school programming, and just a budget stability in our individual schools so that they are able to maintain the programs they have and actually consider increasing the programs. But creating another school is, I got to say, is probably not in the short-term offing. Lindsay, I think that completes all of the questions that I got before this meetup. Do we have more questions?
Yes, we've got one that came in the chat and a couple that have come via email. So the first one is related to home rule. What is your gut feeling on home rule, and what happens should it be repealed? What, if anything, should we be doing now, and what sort of time frame are we looking at?
Well, if there were a repeal of home rule, I think it would be a disaster, and a disaster on multiple fronts. First of all, the most recent legislation introduced to repeal home rule is essentially one sentence. You can't recreate a governing structure with one sentence. It would need to be much more comprehensive. So it's a disaster that way. It's a disaster in another way, in that Congress has rid itself of the capacity to run the district government. Just doesn't have the capacity, and that's not something you can build overnight or even in a year. Third, it would be a disaster because the federal government has shown an inability to govern itself. And so it's going to do a better job than we are with running the District of Columbia. It would also be a disaster in that local governance is much more sensitive to the needs and the idiosyncrasies of a local jurisdiction. Federal government can't do that. I mean, I just see this over and over that a government that is responsive to the residents that it governs is much better than a government that is disconnected. Um, and we see that with examples of where Congress is still has control over local issues like the appointment of our judges. Um, just a tone deaf. Tone deaf is actually too nice a way to put it. That they're hurting, Congress are hurting public safety, um, landlord tenant issues, civil problems with the inability to appoint judges. Imagine if they were responsible for our budget and they can't, this is February and they still haven't adopted the federal budget for the current year. And the reason why we're able to operate is because we have budget autonomy. So it would be a disaster if Congress were to actually go forward with eliminating home rule. I think the fact that the legislation has been introduced, that the President of the United States has trash talked the district, that it's a concern. I am at this point not losing sleep like it's about to happen. I am talking to colleagues and others about what we can do to change the narrative regarding the district. So I don't want to dismiss it as, oh, this is something we can all ignore. But at the same time, I want to be clear that we don't need to be raising the anxiety level. Lindsay?
The DC Council gave $515 million for the renovation of Capital One Arena. The project was then exempted from compliance with the Greener Government Buildings Act, and none of that public money will be used for energy efficiency upgrades required by that law. Will you make full compliance with the Greener Government Buildings Act a requirement for any deal related to RFK Stadium?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that's correct about the Capitol Arena. And I had a very brief conversation this morning with a colleague who said that, in fact, the arena does have to comply. So maybe the questioner is correct and I'm wrong, but I'm not sure of that. I think we have to look carefully at whether we are exempting existing projects from that. And of course, the question has to do with RFK. I think that going into whatever the development plan is, my position would be that yes, they have to comply with our climate change sensitive laws. Lindsay? And Lindsay, could you repeat how people can submit questions?
Yes, people can submit questions in the chat on both Facebook and YouTube. And additionally, by emailing chairmancs@dccouncil.gov or DMing messages via Instagram, Blue Sky, or X. The next question says, I want to advocate for a new small area plan or street life study for my neighborhood, Greater U Street and North Shaw. It has been 20 years since the last plan was conducted, the Duke Plan, and I have two questions with respect to this. Are there more than two types of studies, as noted above, a small area plan or a street life study that may be undertaken? And are these studies ever introduced and paid for by an at-large council members or the chair, or are they only requested and paid for by the respective ward council member?
The first question, I think there are a number of different kinds of studies that the Office of Planning could do. So it's not limited to just a small area plan. But I will say that I'm not sure that I would have to I would have to refresh myself on whether a small area plan can be initiated by the Office of Planning without it being called for in the comprehensive plan. I will add that I don't think at this point that the Office of Planning is in a position to do another small area plan. It's got a list already from a couple years ago when we adopted the comprehensive plan. And the Office of Planning is just now beginning the rewrite of the comprehensive plan. And that's probably, they would say, well, we should wait until the next comprehensive plan. That's with regard to small area plans and other kinds of studies. In terms of the council tends to defer to the ward member. That does not mean that another council member couldn't push for a plan for U Street. My guess is that if another member did, that the Ward 1 council member, assuming we're talking about the part of U Street that's in Ward 1, that it doesn't mean that the Ward 1 council member wouldn't suddenly sit up and get involved. And if she had issues, the council would probably the ward member on that. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I believe so.
Of course, Lindsay, you didn't ask the
I
question, so.
didn't, but I mean, it sounded good to me, so we'll roll with that. I see the Ward 8 Council office is sending emails offering to provide constituent services. Is it normal for the staff to operate after a council member is expelled?
It is sanctioned in this case, meaning that I just met today with the constituent services director, who was working for the Ward 8 council member. All of the Ward 8 staff is temporarily under my direction, because we don't, just because of the indiscretions of a member, it doesn't mean that their staff suddenly is jobless. And it is my intent that constituent services operations will continue in Ward 8. And that is what we did when the Ward 2 council member resigned. So this has happened before, and I wanted to continue that there is a constituent service operation for Ward 8. Probably a bit different than it was under the council member, but I want that Ward 8 residents have an office they can call when there are issues with city services or other needs. Lindsay?
Follow up on the Capital One Arena. Chairman, on the Capital One Arena, the project was granted an exception via the process outlined in the law. So what you heard about the compliance may be technically correct, but incorrect on substance. Just a heads up.
Okay. I'll take that as a statement, not a question.
Yes. Next, whatever happened to fare-free buses?
The mayor didn't support it, which was a surprise because the mayor had been battling with the council for several years about fare-free circulator. And of course, the mayor pushed with great glee and pride the kids ride free on buses and Metro Rail, but she didn't support the fare-free buses. And it came at a time when the budget, the available funding for this district's budget was beginning to shrink. Let me be clear. Our revenues have grown year after year. So they haven't shrunk in the sense that we have less money. No, we have much more money, much more money. But shrink in the sense that the growth was not as great as it had been. And because the growth is actually at this point less than our expenditure growth, it means that we have spending pressures. I would like that the mayor would fix that in her budget proposals, but she has not. And I could say more last year when she submitted the budget, even though she proposed to cut a whole lot of programs, most of which the council was able to restore. While she cut a whole bunch of programs, The budget that she submitted was actually $1 billion larger. $1 billion larger. Our budget went from, if I remember correctly, 19 billion to 20 billion in her proposal. And now I'm forgetting what the question was. Um, Remind me, Lindsay?
Fare-free buses.
Yes. So the a couple years ago, the mayor simply proposed to eliminate the program before it got started. And we were not only opposed to what she proposed, but angry at the chief financial officer because the funding for the fare free buses came out of the revenue growth. And even though there was the revenue growth, the CFO took it away. If that doesn't make sense, it's because it was wrong what the CFO did, but we were unable to win that battle. So the fare free buses, which I think was a great idea, is an idea of the past, and I'm hopeful that it will come back when our finances improve.
All right. On budget, our elected representative in Ward 8 has been expelled. What happens and who should be the lead on hearing the budget priorities of the Ward 8 residents? Follow up. How are you going to assure us that at-large council members will press as hard as any Ward 8 rep would?
Well, I'm hesitating because the advocacy from the Ward 8 member um, was not as great as the person who wrote the question implies. I remember that there were some amendments that came at second reading. There were cuts to capital projects that the mayor was never going to honor. Um, I am not able to force a council member, to force any colleague to do anything. So the part of the question, which is how will I ensure that at-large members will effectively represent Ward 8 residents? That's why we're elected, because that's where the pressure comes. Not from me telling, picking up the phone and calling an at-large colleague and saying, you will do this. Um, I am hopeful that all of the at-large members will step up and um, to spend more time with Ward 8, given that it doesn't have a Ward 8 member. I'm out in the community all the time, so I hear what Ward 8 residents say, as well as residents of other wards, with regard to services that need more resources or other proposals that we should consider for the budget. And the at-large members should be in the ward as much, and so that they have an opportunity to hear that as well. The constituent services folks working on Ward 8 are reporting to me, and so I will hear as well in that way. Lindsay?
Can you commit to getting all of the at-large council members and yourself together for a town hall meeting? I assume for similar advocacy.
I'm going to say no, because that's just not the way it works. I believe that Robert White is doing a town hall in Ward 8 in the next couple of weeks. I think Councilmember Henderson either recently was in the ward or will be soon. And I go to a lot of events in the ward. So we're there, but to try to get all five together, I'm not going to commit to that.
All right. Can the DC Department of Buildings kick Elon and his people in COTS out of buildings for violating zoning? That's what San Francisco did when Elon tried the same thing at Twitter.
Interesting question. I'm not sure that that's the battle that we should be fighting. I would also say that, there are a few members of Congress who sleep in their offices. I'm not sure that it would work for us to single out Elon Musk. I'm not even positive that he's violating zoning. Um, I never slept in my office, but I do remember when we had the presidential inauguration. I think it was for Barack Obama, that might have been for Biden, that there were some council staffers who spent the night in the building. Um, I guess what I'm saying is difficult to enforce, politically might not be the best battle for us to choose, that there also has broader implications than just Elon Musk, such as members of Congress.
I saw Brooke Pinto introduced a bill banning cell phones in schools. What is the status of this law?
Status of the bill. Well, the bill was referred to the committee of the whole because education, and I chaired the committee of the whole. We are looking to schedule a hearing. I think we're trying to schedule it for the end of March, which is um, what, a month, well, it might maybe 6 weeks from now. So it'll give time for public or interested parents and other stakeholders to testify. Let me just go back to Elon Musk. I like the suggestion in spite of my answer.
Okay. Um, do you have a scheduled date for the special election needed to fill the now vacant seat in Ward 8?
No, the election date, the special election will be decided by the Board of Elections. And my understanding is the Board of Elections is meeting this Friday to decide.
Okay.
The law says that the election has to be held. I don't remember precisely the number, but I think it's between 70 and 180 days after the vacancy.
Will DC still host World Pride with the current administration frequently attacking LGBTQ rights?
As far as I know, there are no plans to change it. The last I had a discussion with any elected official that touched on this, the sentiment was not only that we we're going to be hosting World Pride, but there was no suggestion that we would cancel it. There was no suggestion that, oh, should we consider modifying the event because of the current federal administration. I don't think I said that very well. I've heard none of my colleagues know. I haven't heard the mayor, my colleagues, the attorney general. Nobody has suggested that we would make any changes to World Pride, and um, well, nobody suggested that.
Okay, two kind of related questions. I'll kind of ask them together. What are we doing to block the Hill from trying to take over our city? And what kind of executive orders are the DC government preparing for that will directly impact residents, DC residents?
Well, the mayor, the attorney general, the chief financial officer, my office have all been looking at whether we need to step up our capacity to deal with Congress and the White House. So that's what we're doing. The question had to do with the Hill, but more broadly, that's what we're doing. Um, what was the last part of the question?
What kind of executive orders are you
Oh,
guys preparing for that could directly impact residents?
well, it's a little hard to answer what kind of executive orders that we don't know about. In response to the executive order on birthright, our attorney general joined with numerous other states in suing the federal government. Um, the executive order concerning pausing payments, like Medicaid payments, um, I think the attorney general said that he was a party in that litigation. Um, with regard to civil service, which would affect some of our residents, where the president is ignoring civil service protections. We are not a party, but the attorney general said that he's following very closely what Maryland is doing in that. There are rumors that there's going to be an executive order later this week concerning public safety in the district. As far as I know, and yesterday I talked to the mayor specifically about this, we had not seen even a draft of the executive order, so we don't know exactly what's being proposed. The so it's a little hard to say how we're going to respond. If it interferes with home rule decisions or home rule governance or home rule authority, then we will push back. If it's simply simply limited or focused on what the U.S. attorney is doing, then our response will be different. And I'm not sure what the response will be because I'm not quite sure what would be proposed. If it's that the U.S. attorney is going to prosecute more harshly, um, I probably would publicly disagree, but I don't see how we would be litigating that. So it's just hard to say how we will respond to something that hasn't happened.
What can we do locally about the crash that happened near DCA, and how can we prevent it from happening again or happening in the future? Sorry.
We can't. This is federal, and it's just not our jurisdiction. So my understanding is that the military helicopter was 100 feet above the allowed ceiling. Well, how do we as a local government um, affect that? There's a FAA established flight path, if you will. The helicopter apparently violated that. That's not our jurisdiction. Even setting the flight path, that's FAA, that's not us. Um, and everything about operating the airport is not a local jurisdiction. We do have 4 members of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, but they don't regulate flights. They deal with the operations of the airport, like um, the operations of the airport. The so there, there's really nothing we can do locally other than I will say, and I say this with some pride, it was our first responders who took command of the scene and that did a lot of, if not most of the um, emergency response when the collision crash happened. I mean, I wish that the local government, that the District of Columbia, could have jurisdiction over all this stuff, but we don't. And some of this is not a home rule issue. I mean, if the crash had happened in Cleveland, Ohio, it's still the FAA that regulates flight paths and interstate air travel.
Um, what do you believe are the main issues with the juvenile justice system in DC? Why is it important to address these issues? And do you think the Road Act sufficiently addresses the issues?
Well, the Road Act went through my committee. I think the Road Act is important. I think the Road Act, if it is actually implemented by the mayor, and she was not enthusiastic about it, unfortunately, I think if implemented, it could make a difference in improving. But I do not think that the Road Act solves the problem. What the Road Act did was it requires that before a juvenile is committed to DYRS, the DYRS has to do an assessment of the juvenile in terms of what his or her needs are and what kind of um, services should be provided to help the juvenile get out of this path of um, delinquency. And the Road Act requires that then there has to be a exit plan when the juvenile is placed in DYRS custody. And that doesn't mean we're going to get the kid out of custody right away, but just what's the exit plan? How are we going to work with the juvenile, and what are our plans for services post confinement? The I'm leaving out a couple of things that were in the bill, but basically that's it: is planning before commitment to DYRS and planning after commitment to DYRS. That's what the Road Act does. And if services are provided, then the chances of reducing recidivism are increased substantially. There was more to that question about juvenile justice. My recollection, and I haven't looked at the statistics recently, is that juvenile crime is not as great as it has been in the past. Does that mean it's at acceptable numbers? No, absolutely not. There's too much of it. Um, a major problem that we are having in terms of how the city is responding to juvenile crime is that kids are being taken to the Brentwood Road facility, and there's no programming there or inadequate programming. They're being held for a long period of time before they're being placed, either in the community or at New Beginnings or at some other facilities that can deal with those juveniles. So they're just being held there. There are too many being held there. They're being held there too long. And that as a result, there are a lot of problems at the receiving home. And all of that could be mitigated if I don't want to just blame DYRS, was moving more proactively to work with these juveniles.
Okay, large federal layoffs would affect the solvency of DC's UI trust fund. What steps are lawmakers doing now to prepare, including monitoring fund levels?
I love these questions because I already answered this earlier, but be that as it may, at the hearing last week on the annual comprehensive financial report, I explicitly asked the chief financial officer and the city administrator whether there were sufficient funds in the UI trust fund to handle potential large number of federal layoffs. And the answer was yes, the funds are sufficient. Let me say more. The the amount of money that's in the unemployment insurance trust fund is almost at the same level it was before the pandemic. When the pandemic hit in 2020, over 100,000 people went on the unemployment rolls in the District of Columbia. People go on the unemployment roll where they work, not where they live. Over 100,000 people were on UI. Our fund was virtually depleted. The current problems with potentially laying off or firing the federal workforce, the numbers don't come close to 100,000 workers in the District of Columbia. Yes, thousands. I hope it doesn't happen, but not close to the 100,000 that virtually depleted but did not deplete our unemployment trust fund. So that's why the CFO and the city administrator both said without hesitation that the UI fund is adequate.
Okay, the next questioner perhaps missed your questions about RFK, but says, are you aware of the revenue that New Orleans just made off the Super Bowl week? Not just the weekend. And with a new stadium in DC with a dome, our city could benefit. Plus, the regular season would provide jobs and revenue as well. So we need a stadium here. Like I said, perhaps you can just give your position on a stadium in the district.
Yeah. So if the team wants to build a stadium, I don't have a problem with that. Of course, it needs to fit into a bigger plan for the campus. But I do have a problem with public financing. There's no independent, legitimate research that shows that football stadiums are money makers for jurisdictions. That's when you look at what the cost of the stadium is. I will add this. A football team plays 9 home games, if I remember correctly. If they get into the playoffs, maybe there are a couple more home games. Those games bring in a lot of money. However, of course, there are expenses associated with that. So it's not all pure profit. Regardless, the research suggests that even baseball stadiums are not money makers for jurisdictions. Baseball has 80 games. Well, if it's Bruce Springsteen, which would be exciting, That's actually taking Bruce Springsteen away from Nationals Park, which we own, and putting it in the football stadium. So kind of competing against ourselves. Yes, Taylor Swift won't go to Nationals Park, at least that's what I'm told. She would go to a big football stadium. Okay, that's one concert. Maybe we get Taylor Swift and Beyonce in the same year. Maybe we'd get them every year. I doubt it. The other big draws are going to the baseball stadium, so we would be competing against ourselves. Um, the average cost to a jurisdiction for a football stadium over the past decade, if I remember correctly, is about $600 million. That's a lot of money to make up with 9 home games a year. And remember, after about 10 years, there's going to be millions of dollars that's going to have to be put into refurbishing the stadium. Why do I say that? Nationals Park opened in 2007. Yes, that was 17 years ago. And they are asking they are looking for about, I think it's 600 million to refurbish the stadium over the next several years. They're not asking the city for all of that, but we own that stadium, and that's why we have an obligation there. I'm just trying to throw out numbers here. Now, I have seen some studies that show that these stadiums are very profitable, like the study that Governor Youngkin did to justify the monumental sports going to Virginia. That study by Governor Youngkin was BS. We looked at it. You can go, I think you can still go to the council's website, the budget office, and look at the analysis they did. I mean, grossly inflated what the hotel rents would be, the hotel occupancy rate would be, the parking lot revenue, the just on almost every metric, the study exaggerated what the revenue would be to the state of Virginia. Yes, so the um, the self-subscribed studies that governors and mayors and county executives do when they want to justify putting money into a private stadium, those studies do say that they make a lot of money, but all the other studies say, they're money losers. So I think that was a very long answer to a question, but the fact that there would be 9 home games does not um, does not make the stadium profitable.
I've been asked to correct that the number of home games, yes, there would be 9 actual games, but there would likely be 2 preseason games as well, since there's an 18-game season. And Beyonce today, her pre-sale sold out in 1 hour. I've just been asked to share that information.
Oh,
Outside,
sure. Beyonce would be very profitable,
yes.
as would Taylor Swift. But that's profitable in that one event. Does that come close to bringing us the $600 million?
I'm just the messenger, and in that
You're right.
regard, that is the last question that I see in the chats and via social media. If there's anything else you'd like to talk to the
Sure.
about?
I hate these virtual meetups because I would much rather be face to face with folks. I think it's a much better interaction. And our next meetup will be in person. We haven't decided where, but it will be in the month of March. I want to thank everybody who showed up this evening. I would say, especially coming out in the snow, except that I think we're all inside on our laptops. And actually, the snow is kind of pretty. I'm looking out the window. The council is in the midst of its performance oversight hearings. Every committee is having hearings this month and into beginning of March with the agencies under their jurisdiction, asking them a lot of questions related to the current year budget, the current year spending, and also last year. We will be getting the budget from the mayor for next year, fiscal year. We'll be getting that budget around April 2nd, and then we will have a series of hearings on that budget. The schedule for the budget hearings, I don't believe has been released. The schedule for performance oversight, well, we're about halfway through, but that's available on the council's website, www.dccouncil.gov. Want to again thank everyone for attending. Lindsay, is that it?
That's